Herr Rainwater.
Hello.
I don't know if you noticed, but I'm doing a thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Guten Tag.
No, kind of. I'm trying to force myself to learn new language things. So every podcast in season 2, I started with Mr. Rainwater. So now every podcast of season 3, I'm trying to start with a different language of Mr. And to be honest with you, I forgot to look it up today. And that was the only one that popped in my mind that I knew already. So we'll see how that goes going forward. Tonight we're talking about inspiration and not motivational.
I'm glad I forgot what we were talking about. I was just like, we'll just go with it.
It's an easier one to talk about, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm going to leave it pretty wide open. I don't want to make it too narrow for this particular episode, but the general idea that I had was talking about what inspired us to become artists, and or general inspirations that you've lately encountered, or this was kind of a question I was going to ask mid-podcast, but I guess I can kind of lead off with it, which will kind of get us into the conversation, which is, do you find yourself inspired by either works or artists per project that you're working on? So like, just as a quick example, for Haunted, I found myself very inspired by the works of John Carpenter. Like, John Carpenter was not the filmmaker who I saw early films when I was a kid. I mean, I did, but I didn't see those films and go, oh, I want to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
But when I started developing Haunted, I was like, oh, this is really what I want to kind of go for. So I really kind of found inspiration for a lot of the things that I put into the script for Haunted from his works. Not necessarily a Tarantino copycat vibe, but like just like studying a lot of the things that I liked about the work, that maybe were underappreciated or just spoke to me or whatever, or felt like they fit the story or what I was seeing in my head. So I'm curious to know from you, is it per project? Is it artist? Is it the work? What is your process of inspiration?
Oh, sure. I mean, I would say it's per project. I mean, so like with Trailer Park Warlock, there's a lot of things that inspired it, but I think primarily in terms of how I thought about story structure and what I want it to be in the story, a lot of that was inspired by a writer who I'm still obsessed with even right now, which is Robert Anton Wilson. So like he did he collaborated with another author by the name of Robert Shea, and they made a book called Illuminatus Trilogy. And
I just want to clarify, Robert Shea is not known as Bob Shea in any circles, correct?
He might. I don't know.
Because Bob Shea used to be I mean, it's probably a common name. No, Shea, maybe. Bob Shea was the chairman of New Line Cinema for a while.
It's possible. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know.
Back when it was the house that Freddie built. But anyway, continue on.
Yeah,
I was just curious to see if it was the same guy.
Well, as a creative team, I mean, previously they were both editors for Playboy before they were doing that book together. So who knows? Anyway, so like, yeah, they did a book called Illuminatus Trilogy, and that's one of the few books where I've like gone back to reread it, and it's a crazy book. Like it's really fun. It's funny. It's very thoughtful and thought-provoking. And it also is kind of like a mind fuck of a book. And one of the key ideas in the book is like, well, what if just all conspiracy theories were true simultaneously? And like kind of dreams up a world sort of made out of that madness. But so that was a pretty big influence. And then another big influence by Robert Anton Wilson was just his general writing, because he's done a bunch of different books and kind of covered a theoretical model that he came up with alongside the infamous psychologist Timothy Leary. So they like created what's called the 8th Circuit model of consciousness, and it's just a psychological model, but it goes all in. Like it tries to sort of connect all of science and mysticism into a single model and talk about, like, you have behavioral patterns, and you can kind of categorize people by their behavioral patterns that can go back to behavioral patterns that go to like the earliest dawn of evolution until now.
Huh.
And then also reiterate it during particularly important points in your life. So like infancy, toddlerhood, adolescence, mature, like adulthood, that kind of thing. So that last bit I was talking about, it was subconsciously inspiring me, and I didn't realize it until much later on when I was like kind of further into Trailer Park Warlock, and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize how much some of this stuff had seeped into my writing, and that happens. I mean, I feel like that happens a lot with a lot of different writers where they're not fully consciously thinking about the stuff that they put into their work. So like a lot of times, you have people who will analyze work and say, oh, there's so many of these things that are like inserted into the story that I never even thought of. And, a lot of people just assume like it's very willful, intentional, and completely like formulated before it was ever put into the story. And a lot of times it's really like subconscious. It's not fully thought out. It's just like, that's what the artist is running on in that moment. So inevitably, it gets projected into the art one way or another, or inserted here or there. So yeah, Robert Anton Wilson's a big influence, and then the other stuff would be the endless hours of Coast to Coast AM that I listened to like in art school, like when I was working at late at night. So like that was another pretty big influence, like all the UFO stuff and the occult stuff. That's how it got worked into Trailer Park Warlock.
So it got worked into the Trailer Park Warlock, but when you stumbled onto the general idea of Trailer Park Warlock, that you were like deciding, oh, this is a cool idea.
Yeah,
I want to make this. Were those things conscious in your mind, or did you just kind of come onto it, and then in the midst of putting it all together, were you like, oh, I'm actually pulling from this?
I kind of get what you're saying, because like, yeah, to say something influenced you versus something inspired you might be
right.
Sort of different. Yeah, so I think it's probably fair to say that like later Trailer Park Warlock is inspired by that stuff. Earlier Trailer Park Warlock's really inspired by a lot of especially in terms of format, thinking about format and sort of from the ground up. A lot of that was inspired by Cartoon Network shows that I was watching at that time around 2010. So like that was Adventure Time, Regular Show, and Steven Universe. And they were all, the thing they all had in common was that they were shows with really broad appeals in terms of adults were watching them too alongside kids, and kind of veered into more mature themes, and not necessarily like sexuality or violence, but like more mature in the sense of dealing with like heavier psychological kind of weighty topics, like Steven Universe will go into stuff about like trauma and depression and stuff like that, and like really go fully into thinking through characters. It's kind of unusual to me, because like the only thing I had seen that kind of went close to that was like an anime, and I think anime was a big inspiration for some of that within, like, for Steven Universe in particular. Whereas like a show like Regular Show was more like it was more like an FX comedy, but it was for kids. So it made for a really interesting juxtaposition. And so like that's the writing inspiration stuff, and then the format inspiration stuff was the fact that like particular Regular Show, well, I guess this is true for all of them, they were all like Looney Tunes style format, which is to say not a full half hour or full 23 minutes or whatever, more like You know, a given episode was maybe 8 to 10 minutes. So the writers and directors who were working on those shows were able to put out really like good storylines in a short amount of time. So it was really punchy and like kept your interest. And I thought like, oh, you know, that's a really cool way to do something, because you don't, and it's funny because I ended up like kind of counteracting that later on with Trailer Park Warlock, but like you can really do a lot in a short span of time. And it's actually like, for me, when I was writing Trailer Park Warlock at that time, I was like, I only want to do these short stories because it's less pressure on me to create, right? It's like I can focus in a very short span of time to make something really impactful and funny and effective. Instead of thinking about like writing a big epic. So that I would say is like how those shows really inspired me for Trailer Park Warlock. And they still, I mean, I don't know. I still think about that stuff for like later stories, because I still think that kind of format is still really effective, and probably more effective the further we go on, because attention spans are not particularly, and they're not getting better. You know what I mean? Like, you know, people like to talk about, oh, you know, well, people listen to really long podcasts nowadays. It's like, yeah, but you can kind of bookmark them whenever you want. That's part of it.
That's true, because I do listen to a podcast when I'm driving from place to place, but I will stop it.
Yeah.
Get out, go grocery shopping, get back in the car, and pick up where I left off. So, I mean, I don't know if you could say that, you know, my attention span is fully there, because I've gone days without finishing a podcast because I've, you know, finished my errands, came home, and the podcast wasn't over, and I paused it and went out and about and went back into the house and went on with my day, and I didn't listen to it. So,
and it's not to say that people don't enjoy long form stories at all. People do. People certainly do. I mean, HBO Max would not be a thing anymore if that were the case. But I think that I am of the opinion right now that if you want to appeal to broader audiences, you want to hit a runtime between 8 to 15 minutes, you know, because that's where I feel like that's the sweet spot of where you have somebody's attention. In terms of, I guess, in terms of making a story, right? And then there's like, if you want to just get somebody's attention, 40 seconds is probably the sweet spot.
Well, that's perfect for the Madison's Way trailer, because that clocked at 40 seconds.
I was thinking about that too, because the other thing that you put out today, which was the Dracula footage, was also 40 seconds. And part of me was like,
I didn't even notice the time.
Is Jow metering that out intentionally?
I didn't, but that's ironic that came out that same thing. What Rainwater's referring to last night, and I'm paying the price for it at the moment, at midnight on the dot, or earlier in the day, they had dropped a teaser of the fucking title logo for the new Renfield movie.
Oh.
And they said that the trailer was coming out today, which, spoiler alert, I was not a fan of. But anyway, as I was going to bed last night, I was like, I need something to put on to fall asleep to. So I threw on Dracula, because I'm like, I'm excited for the trailer.
Yeah.
And I started watching it, and then a thought just it landed on my head, and I don't know where it came from, but the inspiration to get it done ended up being because I knew I was going to be babysitting or watching my son today, and I wasn't going to get time today to play with this. And it's one of those things where if you're an artist, you know what it means to have that immediate moment of inspiration.
Oh, God. It's so annoying.
And you cannot, but you cannot.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you have to make a decision in the moment. It's like, is this worth doing right now, or do I want to torture myself and wait until I have the time to do it?
Yeah.
And I had no patience last night at midnight. I got the hell up out of bed. My wife was asleep. I snuck downstairs. I figured out how to download a YouTube video, which I've never done before. Ripped it, put it up on the thing, and started doing my thing. And I used AI to recreate Bela Lugosi's voice from the 1930s Dracula movie. So it's got a very vinyl, old radio sound to it.
Yeah.
And I ran it through the AI, and I did my little post-production sweetening in the audio suite. And I came up with something fun, and it only took me 20 minutes to knock it out. And I was like, this is so fucking cool. So much so that today, when my son went down for his nap, I came back down stairs and I did another one for the Invisible Man. Which was fun because the Invisible Man's audio isn't bad. Like like they had improved it within like a year or two, the capturing of sound for film back then, a lot. But I improved it and played with it, and it was another fun little project. But yeah, I guess it came out to 40 seconds. That's really strange that it clocked out that time frame. Maybe I might try and make that a thing. Everybody keeps telling me that I need to. So in a way, everybody's been on the rainwater train and they haven't even noticed it, or they don't know it. Because for those of you who don't know, Rainwater has tried to get me to not so much become a YouTuber, but to be a filmmaker who uses YouTube.
Sure.
And everybody keeps telling me, is like, oh, you know, you don't have to do TikTok because blah, 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 blah. Like that's for girls dancing and stupid like food hacks or, you know, just joke videos or whatever. But there's this thing called YouTube Shorts and you really need to do it. I don't know. And then I ended up posting these two things that are 40 seconds within a week or two of each other. You know what I mean? Like that channel has like had very little activity on it. It's only had like the haunted home theaters that I did. And I think the old Cinephile shows and digits are either hidden or deleted off of it. So there's not much going on there, but it's starting to get more traffic. And now I'm starting to get this weird addiction to the attention that I'm getting on there from not being on Twitter.
You were saying you were working on Invisible Man footage?
Yeah, I already did it.
Yeah,
I did it this afternoon.
Dude, upload that for sure. Because that's just... It sounds so cynical for me to say this, but that's content, you know? Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, did you... I know you commented on the video. Did you see that someone commented in response to you?
Yeah, I did, and that's actually somebody from my Discord because I had shared it to my Discord.
Oh, that's awesome! Thank you.
Yeah, and I had, I mean, I had a slightly more fuller conversation with him about it because I was like, yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't know why he thought that it was like some kind of like robust filtering process because like I don't have a lot, but I have a little bit of experience with audio editing. And like what that is doing is essentially like the CSI Miami like enhanced image kind of thing where it's impossible to do any other way other than to have a program go in and reconstruct it.
Right.
Basic full cloth.
Yeah. And that's the problem that I'm having right now on the other social media outlets. Like I posted it on Facebook and Instagram and stuff, and there's very little appreciation going on for it. And fuck me, I'm the artist guy going, none of you fucking people understand how incredible this is, that this computer is recreating this. It's not cleaning it up, it's recreating it.
Yeah.
From scratch. Like it's taking literally scratch audio
yeah,
and cleaning it up and reconstructing it.
And that is actually like I mean, this is totally getting off topic of the video, but
that's okay. As long as we're interesting, I think that's all that matters.
Totally like a useful thing that AI can do that you like humans can't do. You can't like other than like getting a Bela Lugosi sound alike and have him record over it, right? But like I think that what the AI is doing is more interesting to me because it's taking the actual raw data and then doing an assessment of that raw data and saying, okay, based on this, Bela Lugosi's voice would sound most accurately like this once we remove all the artifacting and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you know, I mean, granted, it's still a guess, but it's an extremely like good guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean the audio sounds very close to Lugosi, and that was one of the things that I really loved about it. And you know, to your point about bringing in a Lugosi sound alike, this is where the discussion of art versus science comes into play with the whole AI thing, because in art you do have a human error, and I think that's worth something. We've mentioned that before, that the human error is actually a good thing for artists and what's going to set them apart from AI. In situations like this, I don't want an artist influence from a Bela Lugosi sound alike. I want the computer to The computer literally picks up on the inflections, the breath, the cadence, the pitch, like all of the scientific notes of Lugosi's voice, like how he chose to give that line, and it's recreating it following what he did, not some artist who's wanting to put their own stamp on it or twist it or whatever. So I think there's a time and a place for an artist to have their voice, and there's a time for science to be like, no. This needs to be honoring the original, the classic, the source material. We don't want to have anything added to this. We want to reconstruct and rebuild what was already done. But, and I'm getting comments like, I really think that this is disrespectful to the original director's vision. And this guy just must be out of his fucking mind, because I'm pretty sure if Todd Browning could have had a better microphone on that set, he would have had a better microphone.
Literally, any director would look at the technology and go, of course I'm going to use that. I'm going to use every single bell and whistle I can get a hold of. If he was alive today and heard the audio quality of the original source, he'd be like, oh my God, that's dog shit. Like, I can't believe it turned out that way.
I was hoping today, I tagged the official Bela Lugosi account on my Instagram post of it, and they liked it, but I was hoping that they were going to reach out and be like, oh, that sounds just like Grandpa or blah, blah, blah. But they didn't. But, it's one of those things where, if you are an artist and you put something out there, you have to have some kind of thick skin, because not everyone is going to like it. And I knew that going in, because I knew, and I even prefaced my post on social media. It was like, let me just say that I think the diminished audio, the mono soundtrack, the grumbly, crackly sound of the 1930s soundtrack is part of the charm and the beauty and the amazingness of the original. It adds atmosphere. Sure. It's just... you know what I mean? Like it really kind of cements the classic as a classic. It's nice to have that. It's a different texture.
Yeah.
That said, this is a fun thing that I did just as an experiment.
Well,
and a lot of people were.
It makes me really curious. What would a restored audio tracks be like? Like, what would it be like to watch that movie with our quote unquote restored, right? Let's say reconstructed. With a completely reconstructed audio, you know what I mean? Because like, kind of going into that subject, it's not like the audio wasn't like kind of reconstructed at that time too, because weren't a lot of the showings like they did live music and stuff like that? Because
that's correct. Yeah, they didn't have an orchestra or anything like that on soundtrack. They had,
so like it's hard in my mind to make the argument that there is like some fully original, this is the director's full intent kind of thing for that. Because like clearly there were a lot of cuts in some sense, or a lot of different takes on that same movie.
Well, it really becomes people defending their nostalgia, the audience at least, because they claim ownership of it as soon as they observe it. You know what I mean? Like that was the experience that they had. They want to hold that experience in their hand forever. My argument with that is the same thing I always make an argument with when people talk about reboots, which is that they're not stopping distributing the original because the reboot's coming out. If anything, they're amping it up by putting out the new or the old film on 4K or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's not taking anything away from it. It's just, another option to be there. Me personally, I was inspired at midnight of all times for a Dracula thing, the experiment of it. You know what I mean? Like that's really what got under my skin, that would not let me go to bed without thinking or without trying it. And I haven't been that excited about technical filmmaking in a while. Like when I first discovered this technique and doing this process in this software, it was exciting. And I was grateful for it. That's the right way to say it, because I would having problems with audio on Madison's Way. And the ability to reconstruct that audio almost seamlessly is saving the shit out of this film right now. And I'm so grateful for it. Like it's really going to allow me to deliver closer to my vision as possible, because audio is one of the most important things to me. It's just that audio people on crew, they want to get paid, man, because as I noticed when I was working on the poster, audio people are not listed on a poster credit. You get the director of photography, the production designer, set dresser, like all these people get credits on a fucking poster. The only person in an audio department that gets credit on a poster is the music, the composer. And the sound designers, the location sound, the post, nothing.
I'm
Zero.
familiar with that kind of treatment because good luck trying to find a colorist on the book cover for most comics.
All right. So yeah.
Doesn't often happen.
So yeah, so we had trouble getting people to do audio volunteer wise for the film, and I really wanted good audio. The plan originally, we were going to have a really great cinematographer do the shooting, so I wouldn't have to, and I was going to run audio and direct, which I could do, like, and that way I could really make sure the audio was good, and we just couldn't do it. So we had to have people step in and do it that weren't so educated on how to do it correctly. And they were able to get good enough stuff that I'm able to use it to recreate it. So speaking as a director, I'm not going to speak for all directors, but as a director, I am going to say that you just want to not necessarily get as close to your vision as possible, because that's pretentious and egotistical, because once you do it, it's a collaborative process. However, in that it's like Rainwater, if you drew something and like your cat jumped on your computer while you were drawing it and it knocked your arm and the line went crazy out of a way.
Yeah.
It's like somebody coming along and saying, well, you have to keep that now. You can't erase it. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. And the fact that I could just do like a couple clicks on a computer and the computer goes, oh no, you were going around. You were making a circle there. Let's just fix that for you automatically. That to me is a tool that an artist is going to use. So to me, to do that to the Lugosi's audio, because Lugosi's not here anymore, they did not have high quality audio microphones back in the day. It was just a fun idea, and it got me really excited to do it. And I just wanted to see what Lugosi's voice sounded like better. Like we only have Lugosi's voice how we have Lugosi's voice. But this thing recreated it so freaking well that it was almost like Lugosi was on a podcast. Like he was as close to a high quality microphone as I am now. And that excited me. Like if I got a time machine, I would love to go back in time and just meet Bela Lugosi and talk to him for an hour. You know what I mean? Like pick his brain. And to me, it was almost like being able to touch that for just a quick second. And it was inspiring to me. Like that kind of thing. I don't get really excited about technical advancements in films when we go from like 2K to 4K and all this kind of shit. Yeah, there's a benefit to it, and you know it definitely excites creative ideas in my mind, because like we shot in 6K for Madison's Way, and I'm gonna master it and probably in 4K, which gives me wiggle room to again fix mistakes that I made on set. So those kinds of things are reliefs. I'm grateful for them. They don't necessarily get me excited to go and create. So the AI thing with this really inspired me to just get up out of bed and go and do it.
I mean, I think that there are a lot of, I think that there were a ton of movies that were inspired though by pushing those boundaries and those limits of like what movies could do. I mean, movies themselves were inspired by that idea of like, you know, with the invention of the camera, people going like, well, you could tell stories with this, you know, and not too many people were thinking about that at the time necessarily. They were thinking more about how can we use this to document our lives? And then, you know, you have names I can't remember right now, but directors at that time who were the first directors who were like, well, what if we try to make a story out of this? What if we tried and like, you know, like all of those, or I shouldn't say all, a lot of those early day movies were all kind of fantastical and surrealistic.
Man in the Moon.
Yeah. Because they knew like, oh, like we can like portray things that you can't portray in real life. So why wouldn't you take full advantage of that? Right.
We would manipulate, you know, filmmaking itself is a magic act. That's literally what we are doing as filmmakers. We are telling stories through a magic. So let me tie this back into our topic, which I think we've gotten kind of back on track on with already. But to me, the moment I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, right? I was 7 years old and I was sitting in an audience with my mother watching Jurassic Park. And when the Brontosaurus came on screen for Dr. Grant and Ellie Sattler, Dr. Sattler, I think she's a doctor too, right? And I don't remember. Jurassic
Yeah.
Park though, like was that moment, and I just remember my jaw dropping in the theater. I literally like stepped outside myself and went, wow. And when I left that movie theater, I was like, I love this feeling so much. I want to share this with other people. Like that's one of those things
Yeah.
that you, when you truly love something, you want the world to know about it. You want the world to experience it and share it with you. So that's what got me into filmmaking. And you could even argue that the technological advancement of the AI thing, the audio thing, that's why I posted it to social media. I wanted to share this awesome thing with other people to hear Bela Lugosi's voice in a better quality than we ever have before. Ever. I know the studios haven't done it yet, but they're going to when
Yeah.
this software goes wide.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know.
I mean, I could easily imagine. Well, I guess we're not really doing releases like we used to, but like some sort of edit or whatever of, reconstructed audio tracks. Why wouldn't you do that? Because that's so, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of, maybe I'm making this up, but I feel like there was a particular point in time where they were like recolorized movies.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh,
Yeah. That kind of reminds me of that. And that was an interesting idea at the time because it was like, oh, right. Like you can go back and like give a new, I don't know, using technology, kind of give a new way of like, I guess remastering, right? Old
it's
films.
a new dimension.
Yeah.
Because, color has, as I'm learning right now on Madison's Way, as I play around with the color thing, color has a way of influencing it. Because if I go darker colors and like a bluish scheme, I can turn Madison's Way into a very serious thriller, like Enemy of the State or some shit. And if I go with a much more bright and poppy color, I can turn it into Wedding Crashers. Like those are two very different fucking movies.
Yeah.
Depending on what color I pick. So the idea that you could add that back to a movie, and they're, they still do that. Like I just past Christmas season, I didn't watch it, but I did see that it was there. It's a Wonderful Life had been colorized, and I know that's been around for a while now, but I'd only recently stumbled across it, and I contemplated watching it, but I have a newfound in recent years love for black and white movies, and I'm kind of just riding that wave.
Sure.
And I know there's going to be a point when I do watch the colorized version, though, because I'm going to want a newer experience with it. And I think that's part of the joy of this stuff. Now, you can go too far. Don't get me wrong. CC George Lucas. Like,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
There's a difference between enhancing and changing.
Well, when you're inserting like entire scenes and like, new elements into the background, I mean,
Distractions.
That's exactly what it is distractions. Like, I think that's the big, because it's one thing because he did do that where there was a release where it's just like, well, this is recolorized, better audio, better footage, but same movie.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then there was the other cut that was like
the special edition.
Yeah, this isn't my full vision. We need to add bells and whistles. And there are a lot of bells and whistles.
And I get that. The inspiration is I would guess that George Lucas's inspiration in that moment was, hey, you guys loved what I came up with that you saw. Yeah. Here's what I came up with that you didn't see, and I'm sure you're going to love it too. And didn't exactly go his way.
But I mean, that was the inspiration that drove him to make those movies. A lot of that was that stuff that didn't make it into the background. True. Because for him, like a lot of his inspirations were like, can I make a better, more robust version of the Buck Rogers serials that I watched as a kid? Or like the weird French comics I read when I was young. And I mean, like, it's all, he only ever talks about a little bit, but like, and you can tell too if you look at source material like right before that time, like in the late '60s, a lot of the French sci-fi comics that were coming out at that time would do things like that, where there's just like these huge alien worlds where there's a ton of shit going on in the background, and it actually works in comics because you don't have the arrow of time forcing you to take it in all at once. You can kind of, if you want to look at a panel and look at stuff in the background, you can.
Yeah, the pacing is up to the reader.
Yeah, whereas in a movie, it's like you only have so much time to pay attention, so you're gonna probably miss, that fucking alien in the background taking a shit. Like you're just not. It's not something you're gonna pay attention to.
At least not on initial watch. That's and like that's something I try to tell actors when I'm directing these days. When they don't have lines but they're on camera, I try to remind them, because a lot of them are amateur actors, like they're just getting started, and I'm trying to remind them, you need to be acting in every moment, even if you don't have lines, if you don't think you're seen, because if your mom comes to this movie, she's not coming to this movie because of the movie. She's coming to the movie because of you. So when you're on screen, even if you're just slightly in the corner, her eyes are going to be locked on you. And if you aren't performing, you know what I mean? Like, you are robbing that. People, when they go back and rewatch movies these days, Glass Onion, right? Like, I know a lot of people are rewatching that now because it's all over the internet. Oh, you can watch when he does this or when she does that, and it's in the background. It's very subtle, blah, blah, blah. People are rewatching movies more than they used to. So you need to be present. You know what I mean? Like, that kind of thought process needs to be there. I don't know how I got on this topic, but anyway.
No, I think, that all goes into what inspires people to make certain decisions in movies, right? Because, like, I think a lot of times, or in stories in general, because I think a lot of times inspiration can just start with a single scene, or just like a single impulse of I haven't really seen this happen in a movie where, maybe it's something really trivial too, right? Like I was saying with George Lucas, it's like he probably was like, I haven't really ever seen a science fiction movie that had these kinds of elements, and that didn't really exist, like where you just have like tons of ships in the background. You have all these like big. There had never been anything with that kind of on that kind of scale where there's giant space battles and
right,
like laser beams and shit like that. Like, that just hadn't been done before that. The only other thing was like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which in its own right was like a special effects marvel, but like it was way more ponderous. It wasn't action packed in the same way. All the special effects shots were pretty simple when you compare it to Star Wars, right? Like, it's a lot of just panning and stuff like that. And there was still a lot of crazy like special effects trickery they did, and was an inspiration for making that movie, right? Because like Stanley Kubrick was that kind of guy who just like, he was, to me, seems like one of those directors. For him, oftentimes the big inspirations for movies aren't just like, oh, this is a story I want to tell. It's also like, oh, there are some techniques I want to do. So like Barry Lyndon, really ambitious in this very subtle way, in that it was all shot on natural lighting. So like, that is a really interesting way of thinking about like, oh, here's an inspiration for making a movie, right? Because like the idea was that would mimic what lighting was like at that time, because at that time everything was lit by candlelight or by natural lighting. So if you want to make a story that really properly evokes that period, you wouldn't use like stage lighting or anything like that. You would want to, as best as you can, capture the scene using natural lighting. So like, I don't necessarily know how much that played into the inspiration towards making that movie, but I'm guessing that it probably had a hand in it. Like, because in the back of not just his mind, but his crew's mind of like, okay, how do we pull this off? And then that becomes the ball that starts rolling, where it leads into all these other decisions that get made.
It is interesting that you raise that point, because now that I'm looking back on it, there is a lot of projects that I have done, whether they've just been written, filmed, whatever. I don't want to say they were done out of spite, but they were done with something to prove. Sure. It didn't matter who it was to prove it to, whether it was myself or someone else. There was definitely an inspiration of, let's see. Not
Yeah.
necessarily like an experimentation mindset, but you know, I'm gonna try. Like there's that
Yeah.
weird inspiration that comes from things, and you know, I get that from, oddly enough, bad movies. When I go to a movie and I get out of it and I'm just like, that was so bad, like bad, bad, bad. Nothing inspires me more than to work on whatever project I'm working on, because I'm looking at something, I'm going, if that shit can get made and released, and I'm not even talking about like story, because that's, you know, that's subjective. I'm talking like, I'll notice like in a fucking professional, not an indie, a professional studio film, bad audio, bad editing, bad whatever. And I'm looking at, and I'm thinking to myself, I could have done better on my fucking MacBook Pro. Like,
Sure.
it's really maddening, and that sometimes can be a real kick in the ass for me to get moving on things. And I'm curious to know from you, what are some of the other things that inspire you other than the things that you love? I mean, I'm not saying is there things that you hate that inspire you, but do you find inspiration from other sources?
Oh, I mean,
Sometimes.
you know me. I get so much inspiration from bad movies. Maybe not in the way that you do.
Yes,
but,
that's a good point. You take it in a different direction. That's fair.
Because I'm kind of like right now I'm kind of thinking about something, which is like so many Neil Breen movies have like plot lines where he meets a woman who's like from his childhood, and they were like, you know, destined to be lovers in their childhood, right? And I'm like, that seems like kind of like, I think you could actually do something with that plot if you weren't Neil Breen. So I'm like, maybe I can work with that one day and like redeem the brain, basically.
It's redeem the brain. That's an interesting topic that you brought up, because sometimes I do look at things like that where I look at a shitty movie or whatever and go, great concept, terrible execution.
Yeah.
I could do that better. And then I'll go and I'll write something. Now, I know I've said on this podcast before that Haunted came from a dream, or a nightmare, I should say, that I had. What I cannot verify, and this is not me dodging a legal lawsuit in the future or anything like that, but I cannot verify whether or not I watched a film called The House is October Built before or after that dream. I honestly do not know. What I do know is when I did watch House is October Built, I thought, I think I remember thinking to myself, shit, they beat me to the idea that I had. I can't do it. Watched the film and go, oh no, I'm fine. They fucked up. This is not what I was going to do. This is great. Thank you for not doing what I was going to do. Still the same subgenre of haunted, or a haunt gone wrong, right? There's a bunch of those fucking movies now. Almost none of them are supernatural, which really kind of annoys me. But again, helps me out. Not that I'm giving anything away from my movie, because my movie's a lot about mystery. You don't know whether or not anything's real. But the point of the matter is, I have done that quite a bit in the past, where I've looked at a concept and gone, that's interesting, but I would have gone another way with it. Like even Madison's Way. Like I look at that, and when I pitched it to a couple of people after they asked me about it, I pitched it to them and they were like, oh, it's like that Boy Meets World episode. There's a Boy Meets World episode where 3 girls who had previously dated Sean Hunter kidnap him on Valentine's Day to keep him from being with the girl that he promised that he was going to take out on Valentine's Day. And they chain him up and they put him on trial. Now, that's not exactly what happens in Madison's Way. In fact, it's quite a leap away from it. But you could, knowing the concept of Madison's Way, look at that and go, oh, I could see where Jow kind of pulled from that. You know what I mean? And I'm not denying it. It probably very much was an influence on the idea. I don't know if I was watching Boy Meets World when the idea came around to me, or like you talked about before, that subconscious idea of,
absolutely.
that kind of seeped into me somehow or whatever like that. And I've reinterpreted it. Reconstructed. I reconstructed it. That's the word for today's podcast, kids. Reconstructed into my own thing. So, you know, it's very interesting to know where inspiration comes from sometimes. Sometimes it's very obvious. Like, you know, in your heart of hearts where something inspired you from, and sometimes you just fucking don't. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
There was a time when, not even a time, I'm still very much open to the idea of doing animation, only because I saw one short that did to me what Jurassic Park did to me, where it left me with my jaw on the ground. It's a short called Paper Man. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
That sounds really familiar, but I don't think I've seen it.
It was a black and white Disney short animated film, and they used this weird...
Oh, no, I have seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like maybe 10 minutes long, about a guy, and there's no dialogue. It's just all sound effects, and he's, you know, falls in love with this girl before he gets to say hi to her, and the paper pushes him around and gets him back to her and all this stuff. But something about the animation style just took my breath away. And it was in that very moment that I was like, because I had never had any inspiration to do any kind of animation before that I became open to the idea of using that medium. And to this day, I still am eyeballing out of the corner of my eye, like that meme with the guy checking out the other girl as he's holding the girl when he's walking away. That's me in animation, and like film is my girlfriend and animation is the girl walking away. Which will lead me to my next question, Mr. Rainwater. Was there a particular comic or artist, or no, it would probably be a comic. It'd have to be a work that inspired you to go, wow, I really want to do this. This really speaks to me. Is there anything? I mean, we've talked in the past. I don't want to say you settled, but I know we've talked in the past that you said that you were definitely interested in filmmaking at some point, and you thought that comics was more plausible way of doing what you wanted to do. Am I correct in that?
Full control, yeah.
Was that more so the inspiration to get into comics, or was it the medium itself, or a particular something in the medium that inspired you to get into it? Like, seriously, I'm just very curious about that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because like, I mean, I'll say the stuff that inspired me to get into storytelling in general, that kind of changed from year to year. I mean, when I was a kid, it was like anime and video games, right? Like there was a year where Dragon Ball Z was like the most influential thing on my psyche. Like, so like there's a story that I'm working on right now that I'm going to eventually publish. But I'm only like 12 pages into it currently. But like when I was a kid in middle school, there were two shows that inspired me to draw this comic, and those were Dragon Ball Z and Robotech, which were like playing on Cartoon Network at that time. And this is when I first got cable too, so like everything was new to me, and like Cartoon Network was the shit when I was a kid. Now that story like went through several different phases, because before middle school I had drawn it in a different sort of like more like Animaniacs or Freakazoid, like when I was in 4th and 5th grade. So it was more like a jokey kind of gag strip kind of thing. Same characters. But then like a couple years later, those same characters were suddenly being refitted to be like Dragon Ball Z and Robotech. So like go forward into high school, and I was still trying to figure out how to use those characters, but then the influences were or the inspirations were like Japanese RPGs like Final Fantasy VII or Chrono Trigger or stuff like that. So like at that time I was like, oh, I'm gonna design a video game with these characters, and then like make a story around them. And then in high school, like I think freshman or sophomore year in high school was the year where I put those away. And I was suddenly inspired or influenced by a totally different show, which was Cowboy Bebop. And I made like, I had a whole other comic that I wanted to make with totally different characters. And that was when I started drawing human characters for the first time. That was like junior year of high school. And I went because there was a long time where I like everything that I drew was like robots and animals and shit like that. So I didn't draw hardly any people, like for the longest time. And it really wasn't until like, honestly, it wasn't until junior year of art school where I was like, I think I know how to draw humans now.
Wow.
So like, I've gone through that whole process, right? And that's kind of what became Trailer Park Warlock, right? And now I'm on the other side of that, and I'm looking back at that original story that was the one that I had spent so much time with those characters. And I'm like, you know what? I want to take another stab at those characters and just like make a beginning to end story, and just like nothing too complicated, nothing epic, just a beginning to end story, you know, like maybe grand total like 300 pages, which sounds like a lot, but for me is like it's a couple years work, you know, it's not that much. Something that would be a story that like somebody in middle school could read in about a couple hours and be on a weekend, right? So that was kind of what had led me to wanting to write it and make it, because I just remember having so much fun drawing those characters when I was a kid. And I mean, I must have drawn a couple hundred pages just with those characters on comics that nobody will ever see, you know? So it was like, well, I feel like it's worth taking one more stab at, and then I can put it to rest, you know? And feel kind of like that idea is totally fully complete. And so that, I guess, I don't know, I don't even remember what our original question was, but like
what inspired you to become not a cartoonist or webtoonist, but you know.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the whole reason I was saying that story is I feel like it changed from year to year, you know? Like there's no one single story where I'm just like, that's the story. There are stories that I remember very strongly. Like right now I'm rereading Sandman because that was a huge influence on me and inspired me to write, to be a storyteller.
Okay, so that would be the answer to the question,
That story is all about storytelling as an art form. It's all about the history of storytelling. It's about what is storytelling's place in society. And Neil Gaiman writes it in a very in-depth and well thought out way. And I had read it in art school, but like it's been a while since art school, so I don't really remember the story that well. And when the Netflix adaptation came on, like I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to reread those books because I want to see what they're like, and they're awesome. So like, they're huge, they're a huge inspiration on me for sure.
So then we won't pigeonhole you going forward. I would say you're a storyteller currently using webtoon that comics as a
too, because like I need to actually go into my profiles and change my description from just freelance illustrator to writer illustrator, because I think that's actually a more robust way of describing what I actually do.
You are in fact a writer. I mean, you do write the fucking series. Don't end up like me where half of your credits block is you. So we're going to wrap up. I think we're pretty much tapped out on this topic. I'm very interested if there's anybody out there listening. If you want to tell us what inspired you, we are very interested to hear. midnightspaghettifactory@gmail.com. You can also tweet at Mr. Rainwater Herr Rainwater. What is it? Matt J. Rainwater. I always get it wrong.
Matt J. Rainwater.
On Twitter.
On Twitter.
Got it. I'm not on Twitter anymore. So you got to harass Rainwater instead of me. We have some interesting things that I'm going to be pitching to Mr. Rainwater when we go off the air coming up. I think some of you will be very interested in one of the things, and I think he is going to be too. We'll talk about that off the air, but stay tuned for that. I also want to go back into the AI thing really quick, just to let some of you know that I went ahead and I replaced our episode 1 of Midnight of the Spaghetti Factory in its entirety.
Yeah.
With AI reconstructing myself and Rainwater's voices, because the audio on that original thing, on the original podcast, was just fucking terrible because we had no idea what we were doing when we started. And when I say we, I mean me. However, so you can go wherever you're listening to it now. Chances are it's already automatically been updated to the new AI version. It'll probably sound really clear. But if you would like to do a comparison listen, the original audio is still on our YouTube page. So you can always go to the YouTube channel and for Midnight at the Spaghetti Factory, and you can watch episode 1 and you can listen to that audio, and then you can listen to it on whatever podcast server that you listen to. And you can do a comparison and contrast of the AI versus the original. Now, Rainwater already hit me with some feedback because there's a couple of moments when we spoke over each other, and it definitely is imperfect at the moment where the AI doesn't know how to separate two distinct voices, and it tries to reconstruct us as one, and it just comes out a garbled, like overmodulated mess. But it only happened sparingly and very, very briefly throughout that podcast. 99% of that podcast sounds a lot better. And I just did that in the hopes that anybody who does discover us going forward gets a better experience. So you know what? Fuck you if you liked the trashy original version audio of episode 1 of Midnight the Spaghetti Factory. I don't give a fuck about your nostalgia. We went back and George Lucased it. So I hope you guys will check that out and get some more plays on that for us, but check it out just for the sake of that. Eventually, if you want to check out my YouTube channel, for me personally, Jow Films LLC, if you see purple, you're in the right place. There's going to be some more AI stuff that I'm posting. There is currently the Bela Lugosi clip up there. There is also, I don't know, remember, did we talk about, yeah, we did. We talked about the AI replacing some of the audio in my trailer for Madison's Way. So you could check that out and see if you could spot it if you don't remember where I pointed it out where it is, and have some fun with that. But if you do check out the channel, please feel free to subscribe to it, because I'm also going to be eventually at some point illustrating what AI software I'm using and the techniques I'm using in post-production to kind of enhance it a little bit more, because the AI delivers a great file to start with, but it's not finished. Like, you still need to do some sweetening to it. So I am going to be doing that in a little while. I got to finish up the editing on Madison's Way first, but look out for that if you want to. Mr. Rainwater, do you have anything else to add before we go off the air?
When seeking out inspiration, looking at other people's work is great, but also, as I say all the time, pulling from your own life is oftentimes the best inspiration.
Wise words. And we'll end on that. We'll see you next week, everybody.
Later.